The gunshot echoed through the dusty Montana streets as Pearl Winters ducked behind the general store, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird seeking freedom. The year was 1878, and freedom was exactly what she had been searching for when she fled her husband's ranch 3 days ago, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch of coins sewn into her petticoat. She pressed her trembling fingers against her split lip, wincing at the sharp sting. The bruise beneath her right eye had turned a sickly shade of purple, matching the marks that circled her wrists like macabre bracelets. But still, Pearl forced her lips into what resembled a smile whenever anyone passed. She'd learned long ago that showing weakness only invited more trouble. "Got nowhere to run now, Pearl." The familiar voice of her husband, Victor Dalton, carried on the wind. He wasn't her husband by law anymore, not since she'd torn up the marriage certificate and fled, but he wouldn't accept that. "You think you can just leave? You're mine until I say otherwise." Pearl's breath caught in her throat as she glanced around frantically. The small Montana mining town of Silver Creek offered few hiding places, and she'd already exhausted most of them. 3 days of running, sleeping in stables and behind saloons, had left her exhausted and desperate. As Victor's heavy footsteps drew closer, Pearl darted across the alley toward the livery stable. If she could just borrow a horse, steal one if necessary, she might have a chance. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as she slipped inside the dimly lit building, the scent of hay and horses filling her nostrils. "Can I help you, madam?" Pearl nearly jumped out of her skin at the deep voice. She whirled around to face a tall man standing in the shadows, a pitchfork in his weathered hands. He stepped forward into a shaft of sunlight streaming through the stable window, revealing a face tanned by years under the sun. His eyes, as blue as a summer sky, widened slightly as they took in her appearance. Pearl faltered, desperately trying to compose herself. She straightened her shoulders and forced that familiar smile. "I was just looking to perhaps purchase a horse." The man set down his pitchfork and took another step toward her, his movements slow and careful, as if approaching a skittish colt. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms, worn denim pants, and dusty boots. A cowboy hat hung from a peg on the wall nearby. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly, his eyes filled with a kindness that made Pearl's carefully constructed facade begin to crumble. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're running from someone," he stated matter-of-factly, "and whoever it is has hurt you, badly from the looks of it." He gestured toward her face, her bruised wrists. Before Pearl could respond, a shout came from outside, much closer now. "Pearl, I know you're around here somewhere." The cowboy's expression darkened. Without hesitation, he moved to the stable door and peered out. When he turned back to Pearl, his decision was already made. "Back room, now." He pointed to a small door at the rear of the stable. "Name's Owen Atwood, and I don't much care for men who beat women." Pearl hesitated only a moment before rushing toward the door he'd indicated. As she passed him, he added in a low voice, "I'll handle this. You stay quiet." The small room appeared to be Owen's living quarters, a simple cot, a trunk, a small table with a wash basin, and a bookshelf filled with more volumes than Pearl would have expected for a stable hand. She pressed her ear to the door, listening anxiously as heavy footsteps entered the stable. "Afternoon," came Owen's casual greeting. "Something I can help you with?" "Looking for a woman, my wife." Victor's voice made Pearl's blood run cold. "About this tall, dark hair, pretty except for where she's been marked up a bit. Discipline, you understand." There was a long pause, and Pearl held her breath. "Can't say I've seen anyone like that," Owen replied, his tone neutral. "Just been tending to the horses all afternoon." "Mind if I look around?" Victor demanded. "Actually, I do mind." Owen's voice had hardened. "This is private property owned by Mr. Sullivan. Unless you've got a warrant or his permission, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "You hiding something, cowboy?" "Just respecting my employer's property," Owen answered smoothly. "Town marshal's office is just down the street if you want to take it up with him." Another tense silence followed. "I'll be watching, stable boy," Victor finally growled. And when I find her, and I will find her, she'll learn what happens to wives who don't know their place." The sound of retreating footsteps, followed by the stable door closing, sent a wave of relief washing over Pearl. She sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. The door to the small room opened slowly. Owen stood there, his expression grim. "He's gone for now, but he'll be back," he said quietly. "That your husband?" Pearl nodded, unable to find her voice. Owen studied her for a long moment, then reached for his hat on the peg. "My shift ends in 10 minutes. We need to get you somewhere safe, and it ain't here." He hesitated, then added, "If you'll trust me, that is." Pearl looked up at this stranger, this cowboy with kind eyes who had just lied to protect her without knowing a thing about her. She had few options and fewer allies. "I don't have much choice, do I?" She replied, attempting once more to smile through her pain. Owen shook his head, his expression softening. "Like I said before, madam, you don't have to pretend with me." For the first time in years, Pearl let the smile fade from her face, revealing the raw fear and exhaustion beneath. And strangely, in that moment of honest vulnerability, she felt the first fragile seedling of hope take root in her heart. Owen finished his stable duties in record time, all the while keeping an eye out for Pearl's husband. The man's threats had stirred something protective in him that he hadn't felt in years. He'd seen that look before in his mother's eyes when his father would come home in one of his rages. The forced smile, the attempt to appear normal while terror lived just beneath the surface. He returned to find Pearl sitting on his cot, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd splashed some water on her face, but it had done little to hide the marks of abuse. "We need to move quickly," Owen said, reaching for a worn leather satchel. He stuffed a few belongings inside. "That man, your husband, he'll be asking questions all over town. Won't take long before someone tells him about the stable hand who lives alone." Pearl stood, her movements stiff with pain she was trying to hide. "Where will we go?" "I've got a small cabin." "Outside town, about 5 miles up in the foothills," Owen explained, grabbing a worn wool blanket and adding it to his bag. "It's not much, but it's private. You'll be safe there while we figure out what to do next." Pearl questioned, her voice small. Owen paused in his packing to look at her directly. "I'm not in the habit of leaving folks in trouble to fend for themselves, madam, especially not women running from men like that." He reached behind a loose board in the wall and retrieved a small revolver, checking it before tucking it into his waistband. The action didn't escape Pearl's notice. "Is that necessary?" she asked, eyeing the weapon. "Hope not," Owen replied honestly. "But I'd rather have it and not need it than the other way around." He peered out the stable window, checking the street. The sun was beginning to set, painting the town in gold and crimson hues. "We'll take the back way out. I've got 2 horses ready, Maple, who's gentle as they come, and my gelding, Thunder." Pearl nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Atwood, Owen," he corrected. "Owen," she repeated softly. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." "For all you know, I could be exactly what my husband claims, a disobedient wife who deserves punishment." Owen's face darkened. "No woman deserves what's been done to you, madam, and I know enough. I know the look of fear. I know the difference between a willing wife and a prisoner." He hesitated, then added more gently, "And I know what it's like to need someone to step in when the world's turned against you." Something in his words seemed to reach her. Pearl straightened her shoulders, a new resolve in her eyes despite the exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. "My name is Pearl," she said. "Pearl Winters, at least that's my maiden name. I've decided I'm not a Dalton anymore." Owen nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "Well, Miss Winters, shall we be on our way?" He led her to the rear of the stable where 2 horses waited. The smaller one, a chestnut mare with a white blaze down her nose, nickered softly as they approached. "This is Maple," Owen said, patting the mare's neck. "She's steady and sure-footed, good for beginners." Pearl approached the horse cautiously, reaching out to stroke her velvety muzzle. "She's beautiful," she murmured. "Can you ride?" Owen asked, already guessing the answer from her tentative approach. "Not well," Pearl admitted. "Victor, my husband, he didn't approve of women riding, said it wasn't ladylike." Owen's mouth tightened at this new evidence of control, but he kept his voice neutral. No trouble, I can help you up and Maple will do the rest. She follows Thunder like a shadow. He helped Pearl mount, noting her wince of pain as she settled into the saddle. Whatever injuries she carried weren't limited to the visible bruises on her face and wrists. Owen swung up onto his own horse, a powerful black gelding with a single white sock on his right foreleg. Stay close, he instructed. We'll stick to the tree line once we clear town. Less chance of being spotted that way. They set off at a careful pace, circling behind the livery and several other buildings before making their way toward the edge of town. The evening was settling in, the shadows growing longer, offering them some cover as they moved. Pearl rode in silence, her back straight despite her obvious discomfort. Owen found himself glancing back frequently, concerned that she might fall, but there was a determination in her bearing that impressed him. This woman had endured God knew what and was still fighting for her freedom. As they reached the outskirts of town, a shout rang out behind them. There, that's her. Owen turned to see Pearl's husband pointing in their direction, two other men at his side. They were already moving toward horses tied outside the saloon. Ride, Owen commanded, spurring Thunder forward. Follow me, they galloped toward the tree line, Pearl clinging desperately to Maple's mane as the mare followed Thunder's lead. Owen led them into the forest, weaving between pines and aspens, taking a route that would be difficult for pursuers to follow. The sound of hoofbeats behind them grew fainter as the forest thickened. Owen knew these woods better than most. He'd spent years exploring them, hunting in them, finding solace in their quiet depths. He guided them along a creek, riding in the shallow water for a stretch to hide their tracks, before turning up a nearly invisible path that wound into the foothills. Only when he was certain they'd lost their pursuers did Owen slow their pace. Pearl was breathing hard, her knuckles white where she gripped the saddle horn. You all right? He called back to her. She nodded, though the motion seemed to cost her. Yes, she managed. It's been a long time since I've ridden. You're doing fine, he assured her. Not much farther now. The path grew steeper as they climbed, and the forest around them changed, pine trees becoming more dominant. As the last light faded from the sky, they emerged into a small clearing. A cabin stood there, simple but solid, with a stone chimney and a small covered porch. A creek burbled nearby, and behind the cabin rose the more dramatic peaks of the Montana mountains. Here we are, Owen said, dismounting and moving to help Pearl down from her horse. Home. Her legs nearly buckled as her feet touched the ground, and Owen caught her gently by the elbows to steady her. Thank you, she whispered, her face close to his for a moment before she stepped back, self-conscious. Let's get you inside, Owen said, leading the horses to a small lean-to stable attached to the side of the cabin. I'll tend to Maple and Thunder, then see about getting us some supper. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a rocking chair positioned nearby. A table with two chairs stood in what served as the kitchen area, complete with a cast iron stove. A curtain partially separated the main room from what appeared to be a sleeping area. Pearl stood in the center of the room, suddenly uncertain. This man was a stranger, and she was alone with him in a remote cabin. As if reading her thoughts, Owen spoke as he entered behind her. You can take the bed, I'll sleep out here by the fire. He moved to light a lamp on the table, the warm glow filling the small space. There's a wash basin behind that screen in the corner, and I keep some clean towels in the trunk at the foot of the bed. He busied himself building a fire, giving Pearl space to absorb her surroundings. The cabin was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's quarters, with books stacked neatly on a small shelf and hand-carved wooden figurines of various animals arranged on the mantel. It's lovely, Pearl said honestly, taking in the cozy space. Did you build it yourself? Owen nodded, striking a match to light the kindling he'd arranged. Most of it had some help with the roof and chimney. The fire caught, sending a warm glow across the room. It's not much, but it's quiet, peaceful. It's perfect, Pearl murmured, sinking into the rocking chair as exhaustion finally overtook her. I can't remember the last time I felt. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Safe. Owen suggested gently. Pearl's eyes met his, and for a moment her guard lowered completely. Yes, she whispered. Safe. Owen nodded, understanding in his gaze. You are safe here, Pearl, I promise you that. He stood, moving toward the kitchen area. Now, how about some food? You look like you haven't eaten properly in days. As he busied himself preparing a simple meal, Pearl watched him move around the cabin with easy confidence. This cowboy, this stranger who had risked himself to help her without question, was unlike any man she'd ever known. In her world, men took what they wanted and gave nothing back. They demanded and punished. They didn't offer sanctuary without expecting payment. Why do you live all the way out here? She asked, genuinely curious. Seems lonely. Owen was quiet for a moment as he sliced bread. I prefer the quiet, he finally said. Town's fine for working, but out here. He gestured toward the window where stars were beginning to appear in the night sky. Out here a man can think, can breathe. There was a story there, Pearl sensed, a reason this kind man chose solitude over company, but she didn't press. They all had their secrets, their wounds that hadn't quite healed. As the aroma of cooking filled the cabin, Pearl felt her eyelids growing heavy. The rhythmic motion of the rocking chair, the warmth of the fire, and the knowledge that for tonight at least no one would hurt her, combined to lull her toward sleep. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was the gentle weight of a blanket being draped over her and Owen's soft voice saying, "Rest now. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." Pearl awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's small windows and birds chirped outside. She was still in the rocking chair, the blanket Owen had covered her with now pooled around her waist. The events of the previous day came rushing back, and with them, the realization that she'd escaped at least temporarily from Victor's control. She'd fled before, but never made it this far, never found help. The cabin was quiet. Pearl rose stiffly, her body protesting after a night spent in the chair. Every muscle ached, but it was a different pain from the bruises Victor had left. This was simply the discomfort of exhaustion and unusual sleeping arrangements. A note sat on the table, next to a plate covered with a cloth. Pearl picked it up, her eyes scanning the neat handwriting. Pearl, gone to check the perimeter and tend to the horses. There's bread and preserves for breakfast. Water's fresh from the creek. Make yourself at home. Back soon. Owen, she lifted the cloth to find thick slices of bread and a small jar of what appeared to be raspberry preserves. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she'd fallen asleep before eating the night before. After a simple but satisfying breakfast, Pearl explored the cabin more thoroughly. It was even more charming in daylight, rustic but clean, with small touches that spoke of care and attention. Hand-carved wooden spoons hung near the stove. A quilt in blues and greens covered the bed. The bookshelves held an eclectic collection of volumes, practical manuals on farming and animal husbandry alongside poetry, history, and adventure tales. Pearl ran her fingers along the book spines, surprised. Victor had always mocked her love of reading, claiming it filled women's heads with dangerous ideas. He'd burned her small collection of books shortly after their wedding, when she'd still been naive enough to cry over such losses. She selected a volume of Tennyson's poetry, handling it reverently as she returned to the rocking chair. The familiar verses soothed her as she read, transporting her to worlds far from her troubles. The door opened, and Owen stepped inside, carrying an armful of firewood. He paused when he saw her with the book. "You like Tennyson?" he asked, setting down his burden beside the fireplace. Pearl nodded, closing the book carefully. "My father was a schoolteacher. He taught me to love poetry." She hesitated, then added, "Victor, my husband, he doesn't approve of women reading." Owen's expression darkened momentarily. "Your husband seems to disapprove of a great many things that bring joy," he observed, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "Did you find breakfast?" "Yes, thank you," Pearl said. "The preserves were delicious, made them myself. Raspberries grow wild around here in summer." He moved to the wash basin, splashing water on his face. "No sign of anyone following our trail, but we should still be cautious." Pearl's momentary sense of peace evaporated at the reminder of their precarious situation. "He won't stop looking," she said quietly. "Victor doesn't give up when he thinks something belongs to him." Owen dried his face with a towel, then turned to her. "You're not a something, Pearl. You're not property." "In his mind, I am," she replied. "And in the eyes of the law, too, a wife belongs to her husband." "The law doesn't give any man the right to beat his wife," Owen countered, his voice firm but gentle, "no matter what some might claim." Pearl looked down at her hands, at the fading bruises on her wrists. "It might not give him the right, but it rarely stops him either." She took a deep breath. "Victor has friends in town, the marshal drinks with him, the judge plays cards with him every Thursday." Owen considered this, his brow furrowed. "Then perhaps Silver Creek isn't where you should be," he said finally. "How far did you come from before you reached town?" "Our ranch is about 20 miles southeast," Pearl explained. "I walked most of the way, hiding during the day and traveling at night. I was hoping to reach the train station in Benton City, but I ran out of strength before I got there." "Benton City," Owen repeated thoughtfully. "That's about 30 miles north of here." "They've got a station on the Northern Pacific Line." He paced the small room, thinking. "A train could take you far away, Denver perhaps, or even Chicago." The possibility hung in the air between them, true escape, to somewhere Victor couldn't follow. But reality quickly intruded on the hopeful thought. "I have no money," Pearl admitted. "Just a few coins, not enough for a ticket anywhere worthwhile." Owen was quiet for a moment, then said, "I have savings, not much, but enough to get you somewhere safe." Pearl's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You would do that? For a stranger?" "You're not exactly a stranger anymore," Owen replied with a small smile. "And yes, I would." Tears welled in Pearl's eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them away hastily. "I couldn't accept that." "You've already risked too much." Owen sat in the chair across from her. "Pearl, listen to me. Some things in this world are just plain wrong. A man beating his wife is one of them. I couldn't live with myself if I sent you back to that." "But your savings can be earned again," he finished for her. "Freedom, once lost, is much harder to regain." He leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Let me help you, please." The sincerity in his voice broke something open inside Pearl, a wall she'd built to protect herself from hope, from kindness, from the possibility that life could be different. A sob escaped her, then another, until she was weeping openly, years of fear and pain pouring out in an unstoppable flood. Owen didn't move to touch her, seeming to understand instinctively that physical contact might not be welcome. Instead, he simply sat with her, a steady presence as the storm of emotion washed through her. When her tears finally subsided, Pearl felt both exhausted and somehow lighter, as if she'd been carrying a boulder that had suddenly crumbled to dust. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping her face with her sleeve. "Don't be," Owen replied softly. "Some wounds need to bleed before they can heal." He rose and fetched a clean handkerchief, offering it to her. Pearl took it gratefully, dabbing at her eyes. "Now," Owen said, his tone becoming more practical, "we need a plan. We can't go straight to Benton City, that's likely where your husband will be watching. But there's a smaller depot about 15 miles west of here where the supply train stops. Less official, but the conductor's an old friend. He might be willing to take on a passenger without asking too many questions." "When?" Pearl asked, a new determination rising within her. "Train comes through every Wednesday," Owen replied. "That's the day after tomorrow." He paused, studying her face. "Those bruises will be noticeable for a while yet. We'll need a story to explain them, something that won't raise suspicions." Pearl touched her cheek self-consciously. "I could say I fell from a horse," Owen nodded. "That might work, and we should get you some different clothes, something that won't match the description your husband is likely giving." He thought for a moment. "I have a friend in Pine Hollow small settlement about 10 miles from here. She might be willing to help." Pearl couldn't hide her surprise. A sad smile crossed Owen's face. "Abigail Fisher, she was my sister's best friend before." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "She runs the general store in Pine Hollow now. Good woman, trustworthy." Pearl sensed another piece of Owen's story in his words, but again, she didn't press. Will it be safe to travel there? Safer than staying in one place too long, Owen replied, and we need supplies if we're going to make it to the depot. Besides, Victor won't be looking for a woman in different clothes, riding alongside a man he's never seen before. The logic was sound, but fear still clawed at Pearl's heart. Every step away from this cabin meant potential exposure, potential discovery. And yet, staying meant eventual capture as well. Victor was nothing if not persistent. All right, she agreed finally. When do we leave? First light tomorrow, Owen decided. We'll ride to Pine Hollow, get what we need, and continue on to the depot. With luck, you'll be on that train Wednesday afternoon, headed for a new life. The plan was simple, direct, and terrifying. A new life. The concept was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Pearl had spent so long surviving day to day that the idea of a future stretched before her like an unmapped territory. What will you do? She asked suddenly. After, if I go, Owen seemed surprised by the question. Come back here, I suppose, keep working at the livery in Silver Creek. Won't Victor suspect you helped me? When I disappear, a shadow crossed Owen's face. Let him, I can handle myself. Pearl wasn't so sure. She'd seen what Victor was capable of when his pride was wounded. He's dangerous, she warned, and he has friends. So do I, Owen replied with quiet confidence. Don't worry about me, Pearl. My concern is getting you to safety. As the day progressed, they fell into an unexpectedly comfortable routine. Owen showed Pearl where he kept his garden, a small plot behind the cabin where he grew vegetables and herbs. Together they harvested some early spring greens and potatoes that had wintered over in the root cellar. Inside, Pearl insisted on cooking, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. Owen didn't object, seeming to understand her need to feel useful. He sat at the table, mending a tear in his saddlebag while Pearl prepared a simple stew. How long have you lived here? She asked as she chopped vegetables. About 5 years, Owen replied, his attention on his stitching. Built the cabin myself, like I said, added to it bit by bit. It's a lovely place, Pearl observed. Peaceful? Owen nodded, glancing around the small cabin with obvious affection. It is that. After the war, I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could hear myself think again. You fought in the war, Pearl looked up from her work, curious. Union cavalry, Owen confirmed. Enlisted in '63 when I was 18, saw things no man should see. His expression grew distant. Came west afterward like a lot of restless souls. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, did whatever paid, eventually found my way here. And decided to stay, Pearl finished for him. Something about these mountains, Owen said, gazing out the window at the forested slopes. They have a way of holding onto a person. Pearl stirred the pot simmering on the stove. I've never lived anywhere but Montana, she admitted. The idea of going somewhere completely new, Denver or Chicago, it's terrifying. Fear and excitement often walk hand in hand, Owen observed. Sometimes the things that frighten us most are exactly what we need. Is that why you came west after the war? Pearl asked. Because it frightened you. A small smile touched Owen's lips. Partly, and partly because I couldn't bear to stay where every field reminded me of battlefields, where every loud noise made me flinch. He set aside his mending. The West offered something different, a place where a man could reinvent himself. And a woman. Pearl asked softly, can she reinvent herself too? Owen's blue eyes met hers, understanding and encouragement in his gaze. I believe she can, if she's brave enough to try. The simple meal they shared that evening was more satisfying than any fancy dinner Pearl had ever eaten. There was something nourishing about food prepared with one's own hands, eaten in safety, shared with someone who expected nothing in return. As darkness fell, Owen insisted again that Pearl take the bed while he made do with blankets near the fire. She was too exhausted to argue, though she felt guilty claiming his bed while he slept on the hard floor. We should leave at first light, Owen reminded her as she prepared to retire behind the curtain that separated the sleeping area. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Pearl nodded, suddenly shy. Thank you, Owen, for everything. He looked at her thoughtfully, then said, You know, I never asked what you want after all this. If you make it to Denver or Chicago or wherever you decide to go, what would you do? The question caught Pearl off guard. What did she want? She'd been so focused on escape, on survival, that she hadn't allowed herself to dream beyond that. I'm not sure, she admitted. I was a teacher before I married Victor, a school teacher in a small town north of here. A wistful smile crossed her face at the memory. I loved it. The children, the books, watching young minds discover new ideas. You could teach again, Owen suggested. Perhaps, Pearl said, though doubt clouded her voice. It's been 5 years, and I'm... She gestured vaguely at herself, at the bruises, at all the invisible damage Victor had inflicted. You're still the same woman who loved teaching, Owen said firmly. The same woman who reads Tennyson and cooks a fine stew and smiles even when she's hurting. He held her gaze steadily. Victor took a lot from you, Pearl, but he didn't take who you are, not really. His words settled around her like a warm blanket, offering comfort she hadn't known she needed. In the soft lamplight, with his earnest expression and unwavering faith in her, Owen Atwood seemed almost otherworldly, an angel in cowboy clothing, sent to remind her that goodness still existed in the world. Thank you, she whispered again, unable to express the fullness of her gratitude. Owen nodded, understanding in his eyes. Good night, Pearl. Sleep well. As Pearl settled onto the bed, pulling the handmade quilt around her, she allowed herself for the first time in years to imagine a future. A classroom of eager faces looking up at her. A small apartment of her own, filled with books. Freedom to come and go as she pleased, to speak her mind, to live without fear. And somewhere in that imagined future, though she tried to push the thought away, was a pair of kind blue eyes and a voice that said, "You don't have to pretend with me." They set out at dawn, a thin mist clinging to the forest floor as they rode away from the cabin. Owen had insisted Pearl wear his spare shirt over her dress, both for warmth and to alter her appearance. The sleeves hung past her fingertips, and she'd rolled them back several times, but the masculine garment helped disguise her feminine silhouette from a distance. Pine Hollow is about 3 hours' ride, Owen explained as they followed a narrow trail through the pines. We'll approach from the north, avoiding the main road. Less chance of being seen that way. Pearl nodded, more comfortable on horseback after yesterday's ride. Maple seemed to sense her growing confidence, responding readily to gentle pressure from her knees and slight tugs on the reins. They rode mostly in silence, Owen alert for any sign of pursuit, Pearl lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. The morning sun burned away the mist, revealing a landscape of breathtaking beauty, towering pines, meadows bursting with early spring wildflowers, distant peaks still capped with snow. It's beautiful, Pearl murmured, almost to herself. Owen glanced back at her, a smile warming his features. It is easy to forget when you're running scared. I've lived in Montana my whole life, but I feel like I'm seeing it for the first time, Pearl admitted. Victor never allowed me to ride, said it wasn't proper for a lady. Owen's expression darkened momentarily. Seems to me your husband had a powerful lot of opinions about what was proper for a lady. He did, Pearl agreed, a bitter edge to her voice. Proper ladies don't ride horses. They don't read novels, they don't speak unless spoken to. They certainly don't leave their husbands, no matter how cruelly they are treated. She shook her head. I believed it all for so long, believed I deserved what happened when I disobeyed. Owen reined thunder to a stop, turning in his saddle to face her fully. No one deserves to be treated that way, Pearl, no one. The conviction in his voice warmed something cold inside her. I know that now, she said softly, or I'm beginning to anyway. They continued on, the trail winding through forest and across streams. Around midday, they stopped in a small clearing to rest the horses and eat some bread and dried meat Owen had packed. Tell me about Abigail, Pearl requested as they sat on a fallen log. Your friend in Pine Hollow. Owen took a swig from his canteen before responding. Abby's good people, known her since we were kids. She was my sister Hannah's best friend, used to stay at our farm most summers. A shadow crossed his face at the mention of his sister, but he continued. After the war, when I headed west, Abby came too. Her fiancé died at Antietam, and there wasn't much holding her to Pennsylvania anymore. She never remarried, Pearl asked. Owen shook his head, never seemed interested. Built a life for herself, instead runs the general store, teaches Sunday school, helps deliver babies when the doctor's too far out, independent as they come. She sounds remarkable, Pearl said, admiration in her voice. She is, Owen agreed. Strong too. The kind of strong that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He glanced at Pearl. You remind me of her in some ways. Pearl gave a disbelieving laugh. Me, I'm hardly strong. I stayed with Victor for 5 years before finding the courage to leave. Surviving isn't weakness, Pearl, Owen said gently. And leaving took more courage than most people will ever need in a lifetime. Before Pearl could respond, a twig snapped in the forest behind them. Owen was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Stay here, he whispered, moving cautiously toward the source of the sound. Pearl's heart hammered in her chest as Owen disappeared among the trees. Had Victor found them? Had he followed their trail after all? Long, tense minutes passed. Pearl stood, ready to mount Maple and flee if necessary. Then Owen reappeared, his posture relaxed. Just a deer, he explained, rejoining her. But we should move on. We've lingered too long. They continued their journey, more vigilant now. By early afternoon, the forest began to thin, giving way to scattered homesteads and small farms the outskirts of Pine Hollow. We'll circle around, Owen decided, guiding them along a less traveled path. Come in from behind the store, less visible that way. Pine Hollow proved to be even smaller than Silver Creek, just a cluster of buildings serving the surrounding farms and ranches. A church with a modest steeple, a one-room schoolhouse, a blacksmith shop, and at the center, a 2-story building with Fisher's General Merchandise painted across its wooden facade. Owen led them behind the buildings, eventually stopping in a small grove of trees near the rear of the general store. He dismounted, helping Pearl down from Maple. Wait here with the horses, he instructed. I'll find Abby, make sure it's safe. Pearl nodded, suddenly nervous. What if this woman refused to help them? What if someone in town recognized her description? Owen squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, seeming to read her thoughts. It'll be all right, Abby's trustworthy, and Pine Hollow's small enough that news travels slow. He disappeared around the corner of the building, leaving Pearl alone with the horses. She stroked Maple's neck, drawing comfort from the animal's steady presence as she waited, tense and watchful. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only minutes, Owen reappeared with a woman at his side. She was tall and slender, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her plain blue dress was covered by a shopkeeper's apron, and she moved with confident grace. Pearl, this is Abigail Fisher, Owen said. Abby, this is Pearl Winters. Abigail's sharp green eyes took in Pearl's appearance, the bruises, the too large shirt, the wariness in her posture, and understanding immediately dawned in her expression. You poor dear, she said, her voice warm with compassion. Come inside, quickly, the store's empty at the moment. She led them through a back door into a storeroom filled with crates and barrels, then through another door into the store itself. The shop was well stocked but tidy, with goods arranged neatly on shelves and counters. Go upstairs, Abigail directed, pointing to a door behind the counter. My living quarters are above the shop. I'll lock the front door and put up the closed sign. Owen nodded, guiding Pearl toward the stairs. Thanks, Abby. Upstairs was a cozy apartment, a sitting room with comfortable furniture, a small kitchen, and doors leading to what Pearl assumed were bedrooms. The space was feminine but not fussy, with practical furnishings softened by colorful quilts and curtains. Sit, Abigail instructed when she joined them, gesturing to a sofa. You look dead on your feet, both of you. She moved to the kitchen, pumping water into a kettle. Tea first, then explanations. Pearl sank gratefully onto the sofa, the tension of the journey catching up with her. Owen remained standing, hat in his hands, until Abigail pointed firmly at a chair. You too, Owen Atwood. I haven't seen you in 6 months, and you show up with a bruised woman, looking like you've been running from the devil himself. You'll sit and explain. There was affection beneath the sternness in her tone, and Owen complied with a small smile. Yes, madam. While the kettle heated on the stove, Abigail fetched a basin of cool water and a clean cloth. Without a word, she knelt before Pearl and gently began bathing her face, paying careful attention to the bruises. "These are a few days old," she observed, her touch gentle but clinical. "Any others I should know about?" Pearl hesitated, then nodded. "My ribs and my back." Abigail's mouth tightened, but her hands remained gentle. "Husband?" she asked simply. "Yes," Pearl whispered. "Former husband," Owen corrected firmly. "She's left him." Abigail nodded approvingly. "Good for you." She set aside the cloth and rose to attend to the whistling kettle. "It takes courage to leave, more than most people understand." As she prepared the tea, Owen explained their situation: Pearl's escape, their meeting, Victor's pursuit, and their plan to get Pearl on the train to safety. Abigail listened without interruption, serving tea in delicate cups that seemed at odds with her practical demeanor. Only when Owen finished did she speak. "You're welcome to stay here tonight," she said decisively. "I have a spare bedroom. Owen can take the sofa." She turned to Pearl. "First, though, we need to get you proper clothes and tend to those hidden injuries. Then we'll talk about your journey." Her efficiency was comforting. Pearl found herself relaxing in the presence of this capable woman who asked no questions beyond what was necessary and offered help without hesitation. "I can pay you," Owen began, but Abigail waved him off. "Don't insult me, Owen Atwood. Besides, I have plenty of clothes that no longer fit. Been meaning to donate them to the church anyway." While Owen went to tend to the horses, stabling them behind the store, Abigail led Pearl to her bedroom. She closed the door and helped Pearl remove the oversized shirt and her torn dress, her expression grimming as the extent of Pearl's injuries was revealed. "That man deserves a horse whipping," she muttered, examining the yellowing bruises that mottled Pearl's ribs and back. "Hold still now. I'm going to wrap these ribs, they might be cracked." With practiced hands, Abigail bound Pearl's torso with clean bandages. She then helped her into a simple blue dress, slightly faded but clean and whole. "There," she said, guiding Pearl to a mirror. "Much better. And different enough from what you were wearing that you won't be easily recognized." Pearl hardly recognized herself. The woman in the mirror looked almost respectable despite the fading bruises. The blue dress complemented her dark hair, which Abigail had helped her pin up in a simpler style. "Thank you," Pearl said, turning to embrace the older woman impulsively, "for all of this." Abigail returned the hug carefully, mindful of Pearl's injuries. "No need for thanks. Women must help each other in this world." She stepped back, studying Pearl thoughtfully. "Owen says you were a teacher before you married." Pearl nodded, surprised that Owen had remembered that detail from their conversation. "We need a teacher here in Pine Hollow," Abigail continued matter-of-factly. "Our last one left to get married 2 months ago. The children are running wild with just occasional lessons from the preacher's wife." Pearl blinked, caught off guard by what seemed to be an offer. "But I'm leaving, going east on the train." Abigail shrugged. "Just something to consider. A small town like this, far from anywhere important, might be a good place to disappear." She patted Pearl's arm. "No pressure, just an option." The idea planted itself in Pearl's mind as they rejoined Owen in the sitting room. A small town, a teaching position, a fresh start that didn't require traveling to an unfamiliar city. But no, she reminded herself, Pine Hollow was too close, only a day's ride from Silver Creek. Victor would eventually think to look here. "I've been thinking about your plan," Abigail said as they sat down to a simple dinner of stew and biscuits. "The supply train is a good idea, but Gordon Lewis stopped conducting that route last month. The new man wouldn't take a passenger without proper tickets and paperwork." Owen frowned. "That complicates things." "It does," Abigail agreed, "but there's another option. The overland stage runs through Carson's Crossing, about 20 miles west of here, twice weekly to Fort Benton, where you could catch the riverboat to Bismarck, then the eastbound train." "When does the stage run?" Owen asked. "Thursdays and Sundays," Abigail replied. "You could make it by Thursday if you leave at dawn." Pearl's heart sank. 2 more days of running, of hiding, of fearing every shadow. Is there no faster way? Abigail considered. "There's a cattle drive leaving from the Watson Ranch tomorrow, heading to Billings. The trail boss, Hank Miller, is a good man, might be willing to let you ride along if Owen vouches for you. Owen nodded slowly. I know Hank, worked a drive with him 2 years back. He turned to Pearl. It would mean hard riding, rough conditions. But it would get you to Billings faster, and from there, you could catch the eastbound train. It wasn't an appealing prospect riding with a group of cowboys, sleeping under the stars, pushing on despite her injuries. But the alternative, waiting, giving Victor more time to find her, was worse. I'll do it, Pearl decided. If this Hank will have me. I'll ride out to the Watson place first thing tomorrow, Owen promised. See if I can arrange it. The conversation turned to practical matters: supplies Pearl would need, what route the cattle drive would take, how much money would be required for the train ticket from Billings. Abigail made lists, offered suggestions, and eventually produced a small cloth pouch. My rainy day fund, she explained, pressing it into Pearl's hands. Should be enough for your ticket and a week's lodging wherever you end up. I can't accept this, Pearl protested, trying to return the money. Abigail closed Pearl's fingers around the pouch. You can and you will. Consider it a loan if your pride demands it. Pay me back when you're settled and safe. When the hour grew late, Abigail showed them to their sleeping arrangements, Pearl in the spare bedroom, Owen on the sofa in the sitting room. The bed was soft, the sheets clean and fragrant with lavender. Despite her anxiety about the days ahead, Pearl fell asleep almost instantly, exhaustion claiming her. She dreamed of classrooms and children's laughter, of open roads stretching toward distant horizons, and of blue eyes that saw through her pretenses to the woman beneath. Owen rode out at first light, leaving Pearl in Abigail's capable hands. The Watson Ranch lay 10 miles south, and he pushed thunder hard, aware that time was working against them. The ranch was bustling with activity when he arrived, cowboys saddling horses, chuck wagon being loaded, cattle already gathered in holding pens. Owen recognized Hank Miller immediately, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper beard and the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades under the open sky. Owen Atwood, Hank called when he spotted him. Heard you were working the livery in Silver Creek these days. Changed your mind about that cattle drive to Billings? Owen dismounted, extending his hand. Not exactly, Hank. I've come to ask a favor. Over coffee by the chuck wagon, Owen explained the situation, omitting names and specific details, but making clear that a woman needed safe passage to Billings, away from an abusive husband who was hunting her. Hank listened in silence, his expression grave. When Owen finished, the trail boss took a long sip of coffee before responding. Never had a woman on one of my drives before, he said thoughtfully. Could complicate things. She's tough, Owen assured him. Won't complain or slow you down. Hank studied him, curiosity in his gaze. Must be some woman to have you riding out here at dawn to plead her case. Owen felt heat rise in his face. She needs help, Hank, that's all. A knowing smile crossed the older man's face. If you say so. He scratched his beard thoughtfully. Tell you what. Bring her to the North Fork of Taylor Creek by noon. We'll be passing through there. If she seems like she can handle the journey, she can ride with us. Relief washed over Owen. Thank you, Hank, I owe you. Yes, you do, Hank agreed amiably, and I'll collect someday. Maybe get you back on a cattle drive where you belong, instead of mucking out stables in Silver Creek. Owen rode back to Pine Hollow with renewed hope. The plan was taking shape. If Pearl could endure 3 days with the cattle drive, she'd reach Billings. From there, the world opened up to her. Denver, Chicago, even New York if she wished. The thought should have brought only satisfaction. After all, Owen had set out to help Pearl escape her husband, to give her a chance at a new life. Success was within reach. So why did the idea of her boarding that train in Billings leave him feeling hollow? He pushed the troubling thought aside as he returned to Abigail's store. This wasn't about his feelings. It was about Pearl's safety, her freedom. Nothing else mattered. He found the women in the store, Pearl helping Abigail stock shelves while wearing one of Abigail's old dresses, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. The simple blue calico suited her, bringing out the rich brown of her eyes. Her dark hair was plaited and pinned up in a practical style, and some of the wariness had left her expression. She looked up as the bell above the door jingled, announcing his arrival. "Owen, what news?" "Hanks agreed to let you join the drive," he informed her, removing his hat as he entered. "We need to meet them at Taylor Creek by noon." Pearl's face lit with relief, then dimmed slightly as the reality of what lay ahead sank in. "A cattle drive," she murmured. "I've never even seen one except passing by Victor's ranch at a distance." "It won't be easy," Owen cautioned. "Long days in the saddle, rough food, sleeping under the stars, and the company of 24 cowboys who will be mighty curious about you." "I can manage," Pearl said firmly, though uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "If it gets me away from Victor, I can endure anything." Abigail, who had been listening silently, spoke up. "You'll need proper riding clothes." She moved to a shelf behind the counter and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "I've put together some things: a split riding skirt, sturdier boots, a warm coat for the nights, and supplies for your feminine needs." Pearl blushed but accepted the package gratefully. "I don't know how to thank you, Abigail." "Live well," the older woman replied simply. "That's thanks enough." She turned to Owen. "And you'll need provisions too. I've packed food for both of you." She hesitated, then added, "You are going with her, aren't you?" The question caught Owen off guard. "To Taylor Creek, yes, to hand her over to Hank safely." Abigail fixed him with a penetrating stare, and then I return to Silver Creek," Owen replied, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. "I have a job, responsibilities." "Mucking out stables," Abigail said dryly. "A job any able-bodied man could do." Owen frowned. "It's honest work." "It is," Abigail agreed. "And far beneath your abilities, as you well know." She sighed, her expression softening. "The war's been over for 13 years, Owen. When will you stop hiding from life?" The question struck too close to wounds that had never fully healed. Owen's jaw tightened. "I'm not hiding. I'm living the way I choose." "Are you?" Abigail challenged gently. "Or are you just existing, paying penance for surviving when others didn't?" Pearl looked between them, confusion evident in her expression. There was clearly history here she wasn't privy to. Owen broke the tense silence. "We should prepare to leave. It's a 2-hour ride to Taylor Creek, and we don't want to keep Hank waiting." Abigail held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded. "I'll fetch the provisions." While she disappeared into the storeroom, Pearl moved to Owen's side. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Owen managed a reassuring smile. "Just Abby being Abby. She's always thought I should be doing more with my life." "She cares about you," Pearl observed. "She does," Owen acknowledged. "Sometimes too much." When Abigail returned with saddlebags full of supplies, the tension had eased. They worked together to prepare for the journey, checking and double-checking that nothing essential had been forgotten. Finally, it was time to depart. Abigail embraced Pearl warmly. "Remember my offer," she said. "Pine Hollow could use a good teacher if Billings or Points East don't suit you." Pearl returned the hug. "I'll remember, and thank you for everything." Abigail turned to Owen, her expression stern but affectionate. "Try not to be a fool, Owen Atwood," he smiled despite himself. "No promises." He bent to kiss her cheek. "Thank you, Abby." They mounted their horses, Pearl now wearing the split riding skirt and sturdier boots Abigail had provided. As they rode away from Pine Hollow, Pearl glanced back at the diminishing figure of Abigail standing in front of her store. "She's an extraordinary woman," Pearl remarked. Owen nodded. "That she is, one of the strongest people I know." "She said something about the war," Pearl ventured carefully. "About you hiding since then." Owen was silent for so long that Pearl thought he wouldn't respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, reflective. "I was a lieutenant in the Union cavalry, 20 years old, responsible for 30 men, most of them no older than I was." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "In our last battle, I made a decision. A tactical choice that seemed right at the time. 22 of my men died because of it." Pearl's breath caught. "Oh, Owen." "After that," he continued, "coming west seemed like a kind of penance, living simply, keeping to myself. Not taking on responsibilities that might lead to more lives lost because of my poor judgment." "But it was war," Pearl said gently. "Terrible choices are forced on people in war." Owen shrugged. maybe doesn't change the fact that those men trusted me and I led them to their deaths. He glanced at her, a sad smile touching his lips. So yes, in her way, Abby's right. I have been hiding from responsibility, from connections that might lead to more loss. Pearl considered his words carefully before responding. It seems to me that you've taken on a pretty significant responsibility these past few days, helping me, risking yourself against Victor. That's different, Owen argued. Is it? Pearl challenged softly. You're making choices that could lead to danger. Taking responsibility for someone else's welfare, she smiled at him. Doesn't sound like hiding to me. Owen had no answer for that. They rode in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Taylor Creek came into view shortly before noon, a ribbon of clear water cutting through a broad meadow flanked by stands of aspen and pine. In the distance, a dust cloud marked the approaching cattle drive. We're in time, Owen observed, relief in his voice. They're just arriving. They rode down to the creek, arriving as the first cattle began to drink. Cowboys moved among the herd, keeping them from crowding too much at the water's edge. The chuck wagon and remuda, the string of extra horses, came behind. Hank Miller spotted them and rode over, his expression curious as he took in Pearl's appearance. The bruises on her face had faded somewhat but were still visible. "This the lady?" he asked Owen directly. "This is Pearl Winters," Owen confirmed. "Pearl, this is Hank Miller, trail boss of this outfit." Pearl straightened in her saddle, meeting Hank's assessing gaze directly. "Thank you for allowing me to join your drive, Mr. Miller." Hank studied her for a long moment, noting her erect posture despite obvious discomfort, the determination in her eyes, the way she handled her horse with growing confidence. "Owen says you're running from trouble," he said bluntly. "Says you need to get to Billings quick and quiet." "That's correct," Pearl replied, refusing to look away. "My husband is looking for me. He's not a man who accepts being left," Hank nodded, seeming to appreciate her direct answer. "A cattle drive ain't no place for a lady under normal circumstances. It's hard riding, rough company, and rougher conditions." He paused. "But these ain't normal circumstances, are they?" "No, sir," Pearl agreed, "and I'm tougher than I look." A smile creased Hank's weathered face. "I expect you are, madam, I expect you are." He turned to Owen. "She'll ride with us. I'll have the boys on their best behavior, but they're still cowboys. She should stick close to the chuck wagon when we make camp." "Thank you, Hank," Owen said, relief evident in his voice. "I owe you for this." "Just add it to your tab," Hank replied good-naturedly. He glanced between Owen and Pearl, a knowing look in his eyes. "You riding with us too? Could use another experienced hand." The question hung in the air between them. Pearl held her breath, suddenly aware of how much she wanted Owen to say yes, to accompany her all the way to Billings. But she had no right to ask that of him. He'd already risked too much on her behalf. Owen hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. I need to get back to Silver Creek." Hank nodded, though disappointment flashed briefly in his eyes. "Thought you might say that." "Well, we'll take good care of your lady friend." "I know you will," Owen said, his voice tight. He turned to Pearl, and the look in his eyes made her heart ache with unspoken things. "You're in good hands with Hank and his men. They'll see you safely to Billings." Pearl forced a smile, hiding the disappointment that threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you, Owen, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "Live well," Owen said, echoing Abigail's words from earlier. "That's payment enough." Hank tactfully moved away, giving them a moment of privacy amid the bustle of the cattle drive. "Will you be safe?" Pearl asked, concern creasing her brow, "when Victor realizes I'm gone for good." "I can handle Victor Dalton," Owen assured her. "Don't worry about me." Pearl reached across the space between their horses, impulsively taking his hand. "I wish." She began, then faltered, unsure what she wished for or had any right to ask. Owen squeezed her hand gently. "I know," he said softly. "Me too." The moment stretched between them, charged with emotions neither was ready to name. Then a shout from one of the cowboys broke the spell. "Boss, herd's getting restless." Hank signaled his acknowledgement, then looked expectantly at Owen and Pearl. It was time to part ways. Owen released Pearl's hand reluctantly. You have the money Abby gave you, and the supplies, Pearl nodded. Everything I need. Except you, she wanted to add, but the words remained unspoken. When you reach Billings, Owen continued, find the Cattleman's Hotel, ask for Sarah Kingsley. She's the owner and old friend of Hank's. She'll help you get settled, find the train station. I will, Pearl promised. Owen searched her face as if committing every feature to memory. Be safe, Pearl Winters, and be happy. You too, Owen Atwood, she whispered. With a final nod, Owen turned Thunder away, heading back toward the trail they'd ridden in on. Pearl watched him go, an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with her healing ribs. Hank approached as Owen disappeared over a rise. He's a good man, he observed. Stubborn as a mule sometimes, but good to the core. Yes, Pearl agreed softly, the best I've ever known. Hank studied her face, understanding in his eyes. Well, Mrs. Winters, welcome to the Watson Ranch Cattle Drive. We've got 700 head of longhorns to get to Billings, and we aim to be there in 3 days' time. He gestured toward the chuck wagon. Cookie's got lunch ready. Best eat while you can once we get moving. It's hard riding till sundown. Pearl straightened her shoulders and nudged Maple forward. This was her path now, away from Victor, away from fear, toward a new beginning. She would be grateful for Owen's help, treasure the memory of his kindness, and move forward. Even if each step of Maple's hooves seemed to whisper that she was leaving something precious behind. Owen rode hard, as if speed could outrun the emotions churning inside him. He'd done what he set out to do, found Pearl safe passage away from her abusive husband, given her a chance at a new life. He should feel satisfied, accomplished. Instead, he felt hollow, as if something essential had been carved from his chest. Fool, he muttered to himself as Thunder picked his way down a rocky slope. You've known her 3 days, 3 days. Yet in those 3 days, Pearl had awakened something in him that had lain dormant for years, a desire for connection, for purpose beyond simple existence. Her courage in the face of danger, her resilience despite years of abuse, her ability to still see beauty in the world, all had struck a chord in him that continued to resonate. And now she was gone, heading east with Hank's cattle drive toward a future that didn't include him. As it should be, Owen reminded himself firmly. Pearl needed a fresh start, away from Montana and its painful memories, away from men who would control or hurt her. She needed freedom, not another man inserting himself into her life. The sun was low in the sky when Owen reached the fork in the trail where one path led back to Pine Hollow and the other toward Silver Creek and his cabin. He reined Thunder to a stop, suddenly uncertain. If he returned to Silver Creek now, he would likely face Victor Dalton's wrath. The man would eventually discover Owen's role in Pearl's escape. There would be confrontation, possibly violence. Owen wasn't afraid for himself, but the prospect held little appeal. More significantly, returning meant resuming his solitary existence, working at the livery, living in his remote cabin, avoiding the connections and responsibilities that Abigail had accused him of hiding from. The alternative was equally daunting, following Pearl to Billings, perhaps even beyond. Pursuing what exactly? A woman he barely knew, who needed space and time to heal, who had plans that didn't include a scarred ex-soldier with a cabin in the Montana wilderness. Thunder snorted impatiently, as if questioning why they had stopped. Owen patted the horse's neck, still undecided. What do you think, old friend? He murmured. Silver Creek or Billings? The gelding stomped a hoof and tossed his head toward the trail that would eventually lead to Billings. Owen chuckled despite himself. Not sure your opinion counts, considering there's better grazing on that route, he told the horse. But the moment of levity had helped clear his mind. The truth was, Owen had been hiding. From life, from connection, from the possibility of both joy and pain. Pearl had shown him that living in isolation wasn't living at all, it was merely existing. Whether or not there was a future for them together, Owen knew he couldn't return to his solitary life unchanged. Something had awakened in him these past days, something he'd thought long dead. Passion. Purpose. Hope. Decision made, Owen turned Thunder toward Pine Hollow. He would spend one more night at Abigail's, gather additional supplies, and set out at dawn. Not to catch up with Pearl immediately, she deserved her space, her journey of discovery, but to be in Billings when she arrived. To ensure she reached the train safely. To say a proper goodbye if that was what she wanted, or perhaps, if he was very fortunate, to begin something new. Night had fallen by the time Owen reached Pine Hollow. Lamps glowed in the windows of the general store, a beacon guiding him through the darkness. He stabled Thunder behind the store and entered through the back door as they had the day before. Abigail was at her desk, reviewing ledgers by lamplight. She looked up as he entered, surprise giving way to knowing satisfaction. "Well," she said, closing her book, "this is unexpected." "No, it isn't," Owen replied with a rueful smile. "You knew I'd be back before I did." Abigail shrugged, the gesture elegant despite her practical clothing. "I hoped," she corrected. "There's a difference." She studied his face. "You didn't go through with it, didn't leave her with the cattle drive." "I did," Owen confirmed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Got her safely to Hank, made sure she was settled." He hesitated. "But I'm going to Billings." A smile spread across Abigail's face. "Good," she said simply. "About time." "I don't know what I'm doing, Abby," Owen admitted, sinking into a chair across from her desk. "She's running from a brutal marriage, needs time to heal. The last thing she probably wants is another man pursuing her." "Perhaps," Abigail allowed. "Or perhaps what she needs is to see that not all men are like her husband, that there are good men who respect a woman's strength rather than trying to break it." She reached across the desk to pat his hand. "Men like you, Owen, you make me sound better than I am," he protested. "No," Abigail disagreed. "I see you as you are, as Hannah would have seen you." Her voice softened at the mention of Owen's sister. "She would have wanted you to be happy, you know, not spending your life atoning for surviving when she didn't." The mention of his sister sent a familiar pang through Owen's heart. Hannah, vibrant and fearless, had died of typhoid while he was away at war. He hadn't even been able to attend her funeral. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm starting to understand that anyway." Abigail nodded, satisfied. "Good, now, are you hungry? I was about to prepare some supper." Later, after a simple meal and practical discussions about the journey ahead, Owen settled on Abigail's sofa for the night. Sleep eluded him as his mind raced with thoughts of Pearl, her gentle smile, her quiet strength, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of teaching. Was he making a terrible mistake following her to Billings? Would she see it as an intrusion, a man once again trying to direct her path? "Stop borrowing trouble," he muttered to himself, echoing one of his mother's favorite sayings. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. All he could do was follow his heart and respect Pearl's decisions, whatever they might be. With that resolution, Owen finally drifted into sleep, dreaming of brown eyes and a smile that didn't pretend. The cattle drive was even more grueling than Pearl had anticipated. By the end of the first day, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. Her still healing ribs ached with each breath, and her hands were raw from gripping Maple's reins. Yet there was exhilaration in the challenge, in pushing beyond what she'd thought herself capable of. The cowboys, initially curious and somewhat wary, had gradually accepted her presence. They were respectful, if rough around the edges, following Hank's lead in treating her with a deference that never slipped into condescension. Cookie, the crusty old chuck wagon cook, had taken her under his wing, showing her where to set up her bedroll near the wagon, close enough for propriety's sake, but with a canvas sheet rigged for privacy. "Ain't never had a lady on a drive before," he'd told her that first evening, serving her a plate of beans and salt pork. "But I reckon if you're running from what the boss says you're running from, you got more grit than most men I know." The days fell into a pattern up before dawn, a quick breakfast of coffee and biscuits, then long hours in the saddle as the herd moved steadily northeast toward Billings. The work was hard but straightforward, the company surprisingly pleasant. In the evenings, after the cattle were settled and supper eaten, one of the cowboys would often produce a harmonica or guitar, filling the night with music. It was during these quieter moments that Pearl found her thoughts turning inevitably to Owen. The memory of his face as they'd parted haunted her, the conflict in his eyes, the things left unsaid between them. She wondered where he was now, whether he'd returned safely to Silver Creek if Victor had confronted him. The thought of Owen facing Victor's wrath because of her filled Pearl with dread. She knew firsthand what her husband was capable of when enraged. Had she put Owen in danger by accepting his help? The possibility kept her awake long after the camp had fallen silent each night. On the afternoon of the third day, Billings came into view, a growing town nestled along the Yellowstone River, its buildings more substantial than those of Silver Creek or Pine Hollow. The railroad had reached Billings only recently, transforming it from a small settlement to a burgeoning center of commerce. "There she is," Hank announced, riding alongside Pearl. "Billings. We'll deliver the cattle to the stockyards on the east side of town, then get you settled at the Cattleman's Hotel like Owen suggested." Pearl nodded, emotions warring within her. Relief at having made it this far, apprehension about what lay ahead, and a deep, persistent ache at the thought of continuing her journey alone. "Thank you, Hank," she said sincerely. "I couldn't have made it without your help." The trail boss shrugged off her gratitude, just doing what any decent man would do. He studied her face. "You know where you're headed after this?" Pearl hesitated. She'd been considering her options throughout the journey. Denver had been her original destination, far enough from Montana that Victor was unlikely to follow, large enough that she could find work and anonymity. But the idea had lost some of its appeal. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "I thought Denver perhaps, or Chicago." Hank nodded thoughtfully. "Big cities, lots of opportunities." He paused. "Also easy places to get lost, to be lonely." The observation struck uncomfortably close to Pearl's own unspoken fears. In her determination to escape Victor, she hadn't fully considered what starting over alone in a big city might mean. "I need to go somewhere he won't find me," she explained. "Somewhere I can be safe." "Understandable," Hank agreed. "Just remember, safety comes in different forms. Sometimes it's distance. Sometimes it's having folks around who care about what happens to you." He glanced at her. "Owen Atwood's a good man to have in your corner." Pearl looked away, not wanting Hank to see the emotion his words evoked. "He's done more than enough for me already." Hank made a non-committal sound, then changed the subject to their arrival plans. Pearl was grateful for his tact, even as his words echoed in her mind. They reached Billings as the sun was setting, the cattle lowing as they sensed the end of their journey. The stockyards were chaotic but efficient, workers moving to count and corral the animals as they arrived. Hank left his foreman to oversee the delivery and personally escorted Pearl to the Cattleman's Hotel, a 3-story building of red brick with clean windows and a freshly painted sign. Inside, the lobby was simple but well-maintained, with a polished wooden counter and comfortable chairs for guests. The woman behind the counter looked up as they entered. She was perhaps 50, with silver threading through her dark hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Hank Miller," she greeted warmly. "Finished another drive, I see." "Right on schedule, Sarah," Hank confirmed, removing his hat. "Sarah, this is Pearl Winters. She's in need of lodging and some assistance. Owen Atwood suggested she seek you out." Sarah Kingsley's eyebrows rose at the mention of Owen. "Owen sent you? Well now, that's interesting." She studied Pearl with new intensity, noting the fading bruises still visible on her face. Understanding dawned in her expression. "I see. Well, Mrs. Winters, you've come to the right place. I have a lovely room on the second floor, and I never ask questions that aren't my business." Relief washed over Pearl. "Thank you, Mrs. Kingsley." "Sarah, please," the woman corrected. "Any friend of Owen's is a friend of mine." She rang a small bell on the counter, and a young boy appeared from a back room. "Tommy, take Mrs. Winters' bag to room 204. While the boy took Pearl's modest saddlebag, Sarah turned back to Hank. "Your cowboys behaving themselves this trip, like perfect gentlemen," Hank assured her with a grin. "Though they're likely to be less gentlemanly once they get paid." "Might want to warn Macy to expect a busy night at the saloon," Sarah chuckled. "Already did. The Last Chance always stocks extra whiskey when a cattle drive comes in." She glanced at Pearl. "Don't worry, dear, this hotel is respectable." No cowboys allowed upstairs unless they're proper paying guests, and even then, no rowdiness tolerated. Pearl smiled gratefully, relief and exhaustion washing over her in equal measure. After days on the trail, the prospect of a real bed and privacy was almost overwhelming. "Now," Sarah continued briskly, "Hank mentioned you might need assistance with travel arrangements." Pearl nodded. "Yes, I need information about the eastbound train, schedules, fares." "Of course," Sarah said. "The station's just 3 blocks from here." "Trains leave for points east every Tuesday and Friday." She glanced at the calendar on the wall. "Today's Wednesday, so you've just missed yesterday's train. Next one would be Friday morning, 9 o'clock sharp. 2 days to wait." Pearl absorbed this information, trying to calculate how long it would take Victor to discover she'd been on the cattle drive. Surely longer than 2 days. She should be safe here until Friday. "That will be fine," she said. "I could use the rest before continuing my journey." Sarah nodded approvingly. Wise decision. Trail drives are exhausting, even for experienced hands. She produced a key from beneath the counter. "Room 204 is yours for as long as you need it." "Dining room is through there." She pointed to a doorway off the lobby, serving breakfast from 6 to 9, dinner from noon to 2, and supper from 5 to 8. "Bath at the end of the hall costs extra, but I imagine after 3 days on the trail, you'll find it worth every penny." Pearl could have wept at the mention of a bath. "Most definitely," she agreed fervently. Hank, who had been standing by patiently during this exchange, cleared his throat. "Well, Mrs. Winters, looks like you're in good hands. I'd best get back to my men." Pearl turned to him, gratitude welling up. "Thank you, Hank, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." The trail boss smiled, crow's feet crinkling around his eyes. "No repayment necessary, just be well and be happy." He hesitated, then added, "And if you happen to see Owen Atwood again, tell him he's always got a place on my crew if he gets tired of that livery job." With a tip of his hat, Hank departed, leaving Pearl to follow Sarah upstairs to her room. It was simple but clean: a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small desk and chair, and a window overlooking the main street of Billings. "Bath's ready whenever you are," Sarah informed her. "Just let me know and I'll show you where everything is." "Thank you," Pearl said sincerely, "for all of this." Sarah studied her for a moment, her expression softening. "You've had a rough time of it, haven't you?" she observed gently. Pearl touched her cheek self-consciously, where the bruises were fading but still visible. "Is it that obvious?" "To someone who's seen it before," Sarah replied. "My sister was married to a man with heavy hands and a quick temper." She shook her head. "She didn't get away in time." The simple statement hung heavy in the air between them. Pearl didn't need to ask what had happened to Sarah's sister. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "So am I," Sarah replied, "which is why I'm glad to help any woman who's found the courage to leave such a situation." She straightened her shoulders, her practical nature reasserting itself. "Now, would you like that bath before or after supper?" "Before, please," Pearl decided. "I don't think I'm fit for the dining room in my current state." Sarah chuckled. "Honey, I've seen cowboys coming off the trail. You're a picture of freshness by comparison, but a bath it is." An hour later, soaking in blissfully hot water in a private bathing room, Pearl felt human again for the first time in days. She washed her hair thoroughly, scrubbed away the dust of the trail, and carefully tended to her healing injuries. The bruises on her ribs had faded to a sickly yellow, and the pain had diminished to a dull ache rather than the sharp agony of before. Dressed in the clean clothes Abigail had provided, her damp hair neatly braided, Pearl made her way to the dining room. The simple meal of roast beef, potatoes, and green beans tasted like a feast after days of trail cooking. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of curious glances from other diners but too content to be bothered by them. After dinner, too restless to retire immediately despite her exhaustion, Pearl decided to explore the town a bit. The main street of Billings was well lit and busy, with various establishments still open for business. She walked past dress shops and a millinery, a bank and a telegraph office, saloons and restaurants catering to different clientele. The telegraph office caught her attention. On impulse, Pearl entered the small building. A young man with spectacles looked up from a desk where he'd been transcribing messages. "Evening, madam. How can I help you?" Pearl hesitated only briefly. "I'd like to send a telegram, please." The clerk handed her a form and pencil. "Just write your message here. 15 cents for the first 10 words, 5 cents for each additional word." Pearl thought carefully, then wrote, "To Abigail Fisher, General Store, Pine Hollow, Montana. Arrived safely. Billings stop leaving Friday for Denver stop. Eternally grateful for your kindness. Stop." Pearl, she counted the words exactly 20 and handed over the appropriate payment. The clerk read the message, nodded, and turned to his equipment. "Should reach Pine Hollow by tomorrow afternoon, madam." "Thank you," Pearl said, turning to leave. She paused at the door. "Actually, I'd like to send one more if I may." The clerk provided another form. Pearl stared at it for a long moment, pencil poised, uncertain. Finally, she wrote, "To Owen Atwood, Silver Creek Livery, Silver Creek, Montana. Safe in Billings. Stop leaving Friday morning trains. Stop. Thank you for everything. Stop." Pearl, she paid for this message as well, her heart beating a little faster as the clerk transmitted it. It was a small gesture, letting Owen know she'd arrived safely. He would be worried, she reasoned. It was only courteous to inform him that his efforts on her behalf had been successful, if a small part of her hoped for something more, a response, perhaps, or even. But no, that was foolish thinking. Owen had his life in Silver Creek. He'd helped her out of kindness, not out of any deeper attachment. 3 days was hardly enough time to form a meaningful connection. Yet as Pearl walked back to the hotel under the vast Montana sky, stars winking into existence overhead, she couldn't deny the emptiness she felt at the thought of boarding that train on Friday. Denver represented safety, opportunity, a fresh start. But it also meant leaving behind the only person who had ever told her, "You don't have to pretend with me," and who had meant it. Owen pushed his horse harder than was wise, stopping only when absolutely necessary to rest and water the animals. He traveled light, carrying minimal supplies, focused solely on reaching Billings as quickly as possible. The journey that had taken Pearl 3 days with the cattle drive, Owen managed in 2, arriving in Billings as the sun was setting on Thursday evening. Thunder was exhausted, foam flecking his neck, and Owen wasn't in much better shape, but they'd made it. He stabled Thunder at a livery on the edge of town, paying extra for special care of the worn-out gelding. Then, dusty and weary, he made his way to the cattleman's hotel. Sarah Kingsley was behind the counter when he entered. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with understanding. "Owen Atwood," she greeted him, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "What an unexpected pleasure." "Hello, Sarah," Owen replied, removing his hat. "It's been a while." 3 years, she confirmed. "Not since you helped me with that troublesome customer who didn't want to pay his bill." She studied his trail-worn appearance. "You look like you've been riding hard." "I have," Owen admitted. "Sarah, I'm looking for a woman who should have arrived yesterday with Hank Miller's cattle drive, Pearl Winters." Sarah's expression revealed nothing. "And why would you be looking for her?" Owen understood the protective caution. Sarah had helped many women over the years, and she never revealed information without good reason. "I helped her escape her husband," he explained quietly. "Made sure she connected with Hank safely. I need to know she made it here." Sarah regarded him steadily, assessing his sincerity. "She's here," she finally confirmed. "Arrived yesterday safe and sound, exhausted but in one piece." Relief washed over Owen. "Thank God," he murmured. "She sent you a telegram," Sarah added, reaching beneath the counter. "Came yesterday. I was holding it for you in case you showed up." She handed him a slip of paper. Owen read Pearl's brief message, a mixture of emotions washing through him. She was safe. She was leaving tomorrow. He might already be too late. "Is she here now?" he asked, trying to keep the urgency from his voice. Sarah's eyes softened with understanding. "She went for a walk after supper, said she needed to clear her head before her journey tomorrow." She glanced at the clock on the wall. "That was about 30 minutes ago." "Do you know which way she went?" "Toward the river, I believe," Sarah replied. "There's a small park at the end of 2nd Street. She's been there several times since she arrived, seems to find it peaceful." Owen nodded his thanks, already turning toward the door. Owen, Sarah called after him. He paused, looking back. She's been hurt, Sarah said quietly. Not just the bruises you can see. Be gentle with her. I know, Owen replied. I will. The streets of Billings were busy with evening activity, cowboys from the cattle drive spending their pay, merchants closing up shops, townsfolk enjoying the mild spring evening. Owen moved through the crowds purposefully, following 2nd Street toward the river. The park Sarah had mentioned was little more than a cleared area with a few benches and newly planted trees, but it offered a view of the Yellowstone River and the distant mountains beyond. As Owen approached, he spotted a solitary figure seated on a bench facing the water, her back to him. Even from behind, he knew it was Pearl. The set of her shoulders, the way she held her head, the dark hair neatly braided down her back, all were instantly familiar, though he'd known her less than a week. Owen slowed his pace, suddenly uncertain. What was he doing here? What did he hope to accomplish? Pearl had a plan, a chance at a new life far from Montana and its painful memories. What right did he have to complicate things further? Still hesitant, Owen took a deep breath and continued toward her. Pearl, he called softly, watching as she turned, surprise and recognition lighting up her features. Owen, she exclaimed, rising from the bench. You made it. Relief flooded her voice, but as she took a step closer, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. I had to see you, Owen admitted, moving closer until they stood just a few feet apart. I was worried about you. Pearl's gaze dropped to the ground before meeting his eyes again, vulnerability etched across her face. I was just thinking about tomorrow, she confessed. About everything that's ahead. And what are you thinking? Owen asked gently, his heart pounding as he fought the urge to reach for her hand. She hesitated, searching his expression for answers. I want to be free, but it's terrifying to think about what comes next. I'm not sure I can do this alone. You don't have to, Owen said, stepping closer, his voice steady. If you'd let me, I can help you through it. I care about what happens to you, Pearl. With that, vulnerability broke from Pearl, her resolve crumbling as she stepped forward, advancing into Owen's space. But I don't want to drag you into my mess, she murmured, tears glistening in her eyes. I can't let anyone else get hurt because of me. You've already helped me more than you know, Owen replied earnestly. Let me do the same for you. Pearl took a shaky breath, processing the weight of his words. But what if I leave tomorrow? What if I decide to go to Denver or Chicago? Owen's heart raced at her admission. Then you'll go, and that's okay, he replied, determination firming in his voice. But wherever you choose, I want to be there when you do. For a long moment they stood together, drawn by an unspoken bond forged through shared struggles, courage, and a mutual understanding of their respective fates. Finally, Pearl let out a soft laugh, mired in disbelief. You really are stubborn, aren't you? Only when I need to be, he replied with a teasing smile. So what do you say? Shall we face whatever comes next together? I'd like that, Pearl whispered, more than you know. With that, Owen took her hand, grounding them both in their shared resolve for the uncertain future ahead.